The Shehou industrial zone in Shenzhen plays an important role in China's experiment in opening up its economy. The road lying ahead of any plan to operate a capitalistic-style factory in a country accustomed to a restricted economy is littered with obstacles. Sino-Master Steel Limited was the first joint venture company set up in China 6 years ago. The investment, more than 100 million Hong Kong dollars, was to turn scrap into steel for export. Unfortunately, the enterprise has been a money loser ever since it started operation, and by mid-1986, it had lost a total of $11 million. The problem was insufficient electricity. Part of the steel-making process involves steel melting and casting, that is, melting down scrap and then casting the molten steel into steel billets. This should be one of the most lucrative aspects of steel production. But the electricity supply was only discovered to be inadequate on the day the first trial production was run 3 years ago.
點解你哋喺買機器甚至喺建築廠房嘅時候都唔知道唔夠電力供應嘅呢？
我哋喺投資嘅時候咧，就同埋決定投資呢個廠嘅時候咧，因為第一我哋嘅拍檔係招商局啦，同埋我哋呢個係鋼鐵廠投資1000幾萬美金嘅。咁我哋需要幾多嘅能量啊、地方啊，呢啲係經過招商局咧就批准同埋研究嘅。咁啊，既然我哋咁樣謹慎研究下咧，我哋點會諗到原來冇電嘅？
As a result, the machinery was left to rust. To reduce the burden of interest, the factory authority decided to dismantle the steel melting and casting section of the plant and sold off the machines at ridiculously low prices. 2/3 of the factory was knocked down. To their chagrin, by the time the factory operators had got rid of all their main equipment, Shehou's electricity problem was solved. Hong Kong was to provide their power supply. By now, Sino-Master Steel Limited was operating on a much smaller scale. They no longer made steel from scrap. All they did was import steel billets, which they heated and rolled into steel reinforcing bars. Inevitably, steel bars produced this way were much less competitive in overseas markets because of the high cost involved. The products had to be redirected into the local market when overseas sales failed. And there were more problems with internal sales. Steel making is among the key industries in China. In order to sell steel materials within the country, a sales quota has to be obtained from the government. Ever since Sino-Master Steel Limited was first commissioned in January 1983, marketing had been run by staff deployed from Hong Kong who'd failed to obtain any quota. Only in May 1986 did the director from the Chinese side manage to get the first quota, which allowed them to sell only 20,000 tons, a far cry from the original target of 150,000 tons. Why were quotas so difficult to get? The Hong Kong staff blamed it on an imperfect system, while the Chinese staff criticized the Hong Kong counterparts as irresponsible.
在我哋即係外資嚟講咧，就真係唔知道點樣去申請到呢啲指標啦。因為咧呢樣嘢就唔係好明確嘅，同埋咧有啲屬於一種照顧嘅性質啦。譬如好似我哋又冇咩明文嘅了解話要去啲咩單位啊，有啲咩條件啊，區別啲咩嘢咁，即係跑去邊度我哋都唔知。
在那个报批程序上呢，港方人员呢，他们只习惯于在那个香港做生意的那套办法。 而对呢申请报批这套手续呢，他们感到比较麻烦，所以呢遇到麻烦呢，他们就不愿意再继续下去工作了。
Even given the quotas, the problems facing internal sales were not yet entirely overcome. First, an official permit had to be applied for, which had to be countersigned by the Administrative Bureau of Shehou District. This would normally involve a week's wait. The countersigned document would then have to be approved by the Municipal People's Government of Shenzhen, a process which would take about 2 weeks. And then the long journey would have to be made to Guangzhou for an official internal sales permit from the Foreign Economic and Trade Committee of Guangdong Province. Sino-Master's marketing supervisor, Shehou, said they managed to get the whole thing done in 2 days because of good relationships. Less well-connected companies might have to wait a long time. The next thing needed was an import materials license, which would again involve trips to different units in Shehou, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. The entire process, barring unforeseen trouble, could take a month to complete. Internal sales also meant additional payments of 4 categories of tax, which increased production costs by about 25%. And then there was the problem of an imbalance in the income and expenditure of foreign exchange.
我哋嗱要進口啲鋼坯要俾美金啦，咁啊喺呢度生產所要用嘅電啊、油啊、水啊呢一類啦，又係要俾港幣啦。咁同埋工人嗰啲糧啊有15%啦，要俾所謂外匯券啊或者係港紙嘅。咁啊呢一切都係要俾外匯啊。但係我哋賣嗰啲即係啲鋼筋啦，咁啊若果係市場情況好啦，我哋可以要求對方係俾外匯㗎。 但如果市場情況唔係幾好嘅時候咧，人民幣我哋都要收嘅。咁我哋而家嘅情況就係人民幣我哋好多，但外匯就唔係幾夠，咁變成要找數啊，要咁樣都人民幣都好似又唔係好方便換得翻港紙啊或者美金啊，咁呢個問題好嚴重。
Joint ventures between China and overseas merchants not only face external problems or problems to do with the bureaucracy. A lot of conflicts arose because of the difference in the socialist and capitalistic attitudes towards management, particularly in personnel management. In Zone1987, for example, the director was appointed from China, but people from Hong Kong were in charge of personnel management.
因為你知道中國嚟講咧，呢個特區咧好多人都想入嚟。如果中方嘅人嚟到管理啲人事嚟講咧，第一件事咧就係所謂照顧啦，即係嗰啲親戚朋友啊、姨媽姑爹啊，即係。 或者啲咩幹部啊，即係打個電話俾你啊，我有個咩人啊想入嚟呢度，咁你就好費思量要安排。咁有時咁樣，如果工廠係有需要呢啲崗位，而呢個人係有勝任嘅話咧，呢個好正常，係嘛？但係有時候往往好多情況下咧，呢一類咁樣嘅人入嚟咧，佢不能勝任個工作，仲有佢以一個特權嘅人物嚟自居啦。咁樣嚟到，即係好有事就冇人做，有人就冇事做。 搞到其他工人的情緒就好壞。
我认为呢，这个问题的话不存在。他们有那种担心，因为确实他们来管呢，他们因为在这儿亲友啊亲属少一点，哎，我们呢可能这方面呢客观上呢可能有些各种关系，但是呢应该相信我们呢，既然是上级组织领导派我到工厂来管，那么这方面呢我们也会秉公办事。
The conflict between the two sides was even greater when it came to the dismissal of workers. Some time ago, a major row was caused when the Hong Kong side of the management wanted to dismiss an engineer. They insisted that he be fired because he wasn't doing his job. The Chinese side strongly objected.
中外合资企业的工人呢，虽然是在中外合资企业工作，但是他还是属于中国的这个社会主义国家的一个中国工人。 那么我们跟他之间的关系呢，还是同志之间的关系。那么我们就要做一些大量的政治思想工作和教育工作。那么呢，能够经过教育，能够对一些犯了错误或者违反纪律的工人能够改过来的呢，我们一般呢也不采取开除解雇的办法。如果轻易把他们开除了，那么呢各个企业都开除的过多的工人的话，就会造成在社会上呢一个社会问题。
This incident not only involved the Hong Kong and Chinese staff within the factory, 3 other government departments in China, namely the Labour Services and Personnel Affairs Department, the Trade Union of Shehou Industrial Zone, and the Labour Bureau of Shenzhen, all raised objections to the way the Hong Kong management handled the case. In a letter they sent to the Hong Kong management, they said, our investigation showed that the reason quoted by your factory for dismissing engineer so-and-so was found to be inconsistent with the truth. And they said, your factory needs such an engineer. So Sino-Master Steel Limited should withdraw the decision to dismiss the engineer concerned.
其實喺你哋同員工簽署嘅職員合約嘅時候咧，有冇表明話廠方係有全權去解僱或者係炒人魷魚嘅咧？
呢層講得好清楚㗎，我哋有呢個權。
咁點解有咁多人去麻煩你哋咧？
呢層我都唔明白啊。
可唔可以話佢哋濫用權力咧？
呢層我就唔敢講話係咪濫用權力，因為我都分唔清楚佢哋係一個服務機構定係一個權力機構。當你請人啊，俾服務費嘅時候咧，佢哋似乎係服務機構；當你做啲嘢令佢哋有啲麻煩嘅時候咧，佢哋似乎係一個權力機構，即係話你依樣唔得，嗰樣唔啱。
So what was the resolution? The Hong Kong management adopted a well-tried Chinese method, the so-called the power of the masses. They ran an anonymous survey among workers in the factory. The result was that more than 80% of the workers supported the Hong Kong management's decision. Only then was the engineer successfully dismissed. In view of the various areas of conflict between the Chinese and Hong Kong styles, the Hong Kong management decided to hand management completely over to the Chinese side in September 1986. The conflicts arising from different systems and attitudes highlighted in the above example were not unique to Sino-Master Steel Limited. The Administrative Bureau of Shehou District admitted that similar problems had emerged in other joint venture companies to varying degrees.
中方推薦來嘅幹部就以為有啲事情咧，要同自己嗰個股東嗰個頭來匯報。咁港方嗰啲派嚟嘅領導呢，就認為呢個係合資企業，你只能夠代表個合資企業，為呢個合資企業負責，你唔係代表你自己原來嘅股東。應該講呢個認識水平係應該對嘅，呢個思想應該對嘅。所以如果係咁樣搞法嘅，就兩家肯定搞唔好㗎啦。
In the past, Shehou was but a patch of yellow muddy land. In January 1979, the Chinese State Council gave approval for China Merchants Steam Navigation Company Limited to develop and administer Shehou, with a view to building it up into an export-based industrial zone. Shehou was the first special economic zone to be opened for development. Since then, factories have sprung up like mushrooms over this area of some 10 square kilometers. Today, there are 10,000 workers employed in 112 enterprises, 70% of which are joint ventures. Total investments amount to 2,600 million Hong Kong dollars. Overseas investment in China had been on the rise until the first half of 1986, when a 20% drop was recorded. Shehou was no exception.
嗰個原因有好多方面㗎，一個呢就係從行軍嚟講呢，即係國家有啲咩個出口氣好正啊，其實係外匯嘅管理方面啊，對外資投資者嘅信心有啲影響。
Does investing in China have to mean getting one's fingers burnt? Well, there are relatively more successful examples. Two of them are Jianghua Marine and Engineering Limited and Kaifa Technology Limited. Their experiences show that the most important factor to bear in mind in order to succeed in joint ventures is never to count on internal sales in China. Another important point is that both partners should work towards the common good without any one side selfishly guarding the interest of its mother company. Within 5 years, Jianghua Marine and Engineering had achieved a balance between income and expenditure. 85% of the shares in Jianghua belong to Hong Kong, the rest to the official trade body, China Merchants Steam Navigation Company Limited. All the orders came from clients of the Hong Kong partner. As all the products were aimed at foreign markets, they would not have to face the red tape involved with internal sales. And there would be little danger of running into problems with foreign exchange. The Hong Kong director, Leung Tak-chuen, said there wasn't any conflict as far as managing the factory was concerned. This was because the yacht manager was not appointed by either side. The position was openly advertised. So the yacht manager was responsible to the board of directors of the entire joint venture, without bias to any one side. The area that needed improvement in Jianghua Marine and Engineering was now the quality of work produced by the workers. Yachts made by the factory often had little imperfections, which caused regular complaints from overseas clients. To compensate for the inferior quality of their products, Jianghua kept the prices and profit margins low. Their Hong Kong director, Leung Tak-chuen, said the reason they came to China to set up the factory was that wages in China were only half those in Hong Kong. The low quality and hence cheap prices had undoubtedly reduced their competitiveness. While Jianghua could be considered a successful joint venture to a certain extent, it was not a model company. There was another company in Shehou which earned the praises of both the Chinese and Hong Kong sides. This was Kaifa Technology Limited. Kaifa Technology Limited produced high-tech computer magnetic heads aimed at overseas markets. Since they commenced business in July 1985, there have been virtually no management conflicts between the Hong Kong and Chinese partners.
其實我哋咧就冇分話咩中方港方嘅，都係開發公司嘅僱員。記得我第一次派香港啲人上嚟咧，我強調一樣嘢就係香港所有上嚟蛇口做嘢嘅僱員就唔應該以專家身份上嚟教中方嘅人做嘢，就係以公司嘅僱員做好呢間公司作出發點嘅。
這個公司的工作安排是根據工作的需要，不是根據中方和港方的。
Because there was a shortage of people with the necessary technological know-how in China, the technology was provided by the Hong Kong partner. The company was wholly financed by China, and the shares were equally split between the two sides. It seemed natural to the Chinese management to rely on the Hong Kong staff to take charge of production management, as they provided the technology. What's more, the Chinese partner was totally inexperienced in the purchase of raw materials and the marketing of their products overseas. The objective environment limited the say of the Chinese partner in the running of the factory. There were, of course, differences of opinion. Fortunately, they were able to reach a compromise before any real conflict developed. For example, in the dismissal of workers, the Hong Kong partners did not normally have any hesitation in firing inefficient workers. The Chinese ideal was to educate and correct. A compromise was reached in which the daily productivity of each worker was recorded and openly announced within the factory. On the one hand, this encouraged positiveness among workers. On the other hand, lax workers would realize their own capabilities. It would also form a basis for dismissing inefficient workers in future. The Chinese management felt this method was more acceptable. Within 10 months of Kaifa's opening, altogether 26 workers and 6 managerial staff were dismissed. Because each case was proved in black and white, the authorities concerned in Shehou had nothing to say. The Hong Kong partners also had to put a lot of effort into changing the Chinese counterparts' attitudes towards business.
關於生產交貨時間準唔準嘅問題咧，因為中國佢喺大批量生產嘅經驗咧就唔係好足夠，咁變咗咧佢哋唔習慣有咁大個壓力啊，咁變咗咧佢就做得幾多就交幾多，咁。我哋經過一好大段時間，即係盡量利用一啲壓力啊，就逼到佢咧要準時交貨，否則咧我哋就唔可以配合外國個市場噶啦，又冇人哋唔會再繼續俾訂單你噶啦，佢哋都好了解同埋好接受。
The joint efforts between China and Hong Kong had not gone to waste. Great improvements had been made in the efficiency of workers within 10 months of operation. In January 1986, the efficiency of Chinese workers was only equivalent to 30% of Hong Kong workers. Now it has reached 95%. The daily production of computer magnetic heads also had increased, from 50 previously to 2,000 now. Unfortunately, model factories like Kaifa are few and far between in Shehou. The Chinese authorities also recognize various problems faced by overseas investors and have tried to improve the investment environment. In October 1986, the State Council announced an amended 22-point list of concessions with immediate effect. One was giving private enterprises greater autonomy in the employment and dismissal of workers. Another was a mandate preventing regional governments from demanding higher electricity, water and other charges from export enterprises than from other companies run by the state. Customs procedures for imports were simplified. But the new regulations did not include relaxation of control over internal sales.
呢個會議咧就討論國務院關於鼓勵外商投資嘅22條規定。
The new rules attracted wide attention, and in Excelsior Pacific Industries Limited in Shehou, the joint partners called a special meeting to discuss them.
喺電費方面，就如果係引用呢個法例嘅第5條咧，咁呢個咧就可以咧 幫我哋大大減少我哋嘅電費。
關於土地使用費方面咧，咁如果我哋能夠按照新法例執行嘅話，大概我哋可以節省25%左右嘅費用。
The meeting agreed that theoretically they should be able to benefit from the new rules, but in practice the regulations had not yet been tested. How much they could actually benefit from them remained to be found out. Nevertheless, it was a sign that China was determined to improve the environment for investment and to ensure protection for the investors. To pioneer investors in the special economic zone, like Sino-Master Steel Limited, who have already suffered considerable losses, the improvements are undoubtedly belated. Have they lost heart?
喺初期嗰陣時咧，當我哋即係打鑼打鼓開張啊，上晒啲電爐啦，冇電啦，我哋嗰陣時真係覺得即係打擊好大，同埋都好灰心。咁但係咧，後嚟我哋就即係認為呢個重工業咧要睇長遠啲，同埋咧呢個中國呢個開放政策裏面咧，呢個特區嘅發展，呢個係必然嘅過程。咁我哋咁耐呢6年內咧，我哋都克服咗好多問題啦。 同埋政府嘅政策都有好多改善啊！咁而家呢個環境咧，我覺得係漸漸係對我哋有利嘅時候咧，我哋就仍然有信心同埋唔會咁樣退出㗎啦。